So today, Anthony Brace and myself are here to share with you some outcomes from a research project that was attached to the Wairua Spirit project, which is a decade-long adventure from 2019 to 2029, looking to create an artefact in the form of a documentary that explores the powerful, often invisible drivers of the human spirit in response to extreme physical demands. And every year we are developing a project to coincide with each of the events that are run, and hopefully be able to contribute to some knowledge around ultramarathon running and the psychology that goes behind it. So my name is Kendall. I am a lecturer at the University of the Sunshine Coast and have a passion for ultramarathon running. I am a novice ultramarathon runner, and part of our team we have invited Associate Professor Jeff Lovell, who works here as a senior lecturer in psychology, and he specialises in sports psychology. And also we have Anthony Brace, who is here, has been invited in as part of the team to undertake a component for his honours project. And Anthony, can you introduce yourself and share a little bit to the audience?
So my name's Anthony Brace, and I have a Bachelor in Behavioural Science, and I am now continuing on my studies doing a honours in psychology. And I've been really interested in like pain tolerance and mental toughness, and when you watch an athlete, how they're able to just keep pushing no matter like how deep they are in the supposed pain cave.
It's a definite thing, the pain cave.
Yeah.
So the title of our project is an exploratory study examining the experiences of athletes competing in an ultramarathon, focusing on mental toughness and pain tolerance. And the first event that was undertaken by Jamie Milne was the Hurt 100. So it was a grueling event that is 160 kilometres that was run in Hawaii, in the mountains above Honolulu. And in order for us to be able to access the participants, we relied on the race directors. So I'd really like to acknowledge John Solmonson and Jeff Huff, who were pivotal in allowing us to gain access to the athletes, because as gatekeepers we wouldn't have been able to undertake this project. So we're really appreciative of that. So to give you an overview of how we went about this, Anthony's going to ask some questions around the background and the findings from the literature review to share with you.
So Kendall, can you please tell us what ultramarathon is all about and how popular this sport is?
Yes, so the definition of an ultramarathon is any running race that's over 42.2, so the standard marathon. It's notorious for the difficult terrain, often in mountainous regions, and with a lot of elevation and cumulative incline and decline sort of characterises that event. It became an organised sport in the 1970s, and since then has become extremely popular, although in comparison to other sports number-wise it's still quite small. It has, you have a lot of options for races throughout Australia. So in 2017, they had a record of 140 events that you could choose from. And if you want to go worldwide, there was 4,177 registered events that people can engage with that meets that criteria.
It's quite a lot.
So it's increasing in popularity, but it's also increasing in the number of athletes that are actually successful in completing it.
Yeah.
And so there was a study looking at the actual numbers of completions. So in 2017 across the world there was 127,000 athletes that had managed to undertake this and complete it and achieve their goals. And it's still quite heavily dominated by the male species. So out of those 127,000, there was only 28,000 women. So it's it's gaining in popularity, over the last 2 years it's stagnated slightly. Okay. So the longevity of these athletes. It's quite a demanding sport, and that's one of the reasons why it's become generating more research, is to understand how we can support athletes to maintain longevity and improve engagement in this sport.
So after you've completed initial search of the literature, what were some of the findings that you found?
Well, these athletes have a lot of challenges to overcome, and the research is definitely building up around this space, and in order to inform our objectives for this study, we found a few common themes that were understood around this space, and especially psychology. So they suffer from intense fatigue. They need to manage quite intricately their nutrition intake and hydration status throughout the event. One of the biggest challenges is digestive issues. They work through their negative emotions and cognitions throughout, varying. And as the event progresses, they often the pain levels continue and discomfort, which is quite unique to a specific sport over such a long period of time.
Yeah.
So they were some of the key components that they needed to overcome.
So when you were analysing the literature, what were some of the common traits that you would find in ultramarathon runners?
Well, they are quite a specific, unique population. They show a lot of resilience, so the ability to adapt well in the face of adversity, stress or trauma came up quite often. They have an internal intrinsic drive to explore their physical and mental limits, and that's been one of the common themes that came out. One of the researchers that were looking at specifically at mental toughness invited a large cohort of research participants to provide insight into how they felt, how they would describe mental toughness.
Yeah.
And they had 408 responses in a written word, and then they pulled that together to identify actual description for mental toughness, which is specific to ultramarathon running, which hasn't been done before. So it's through Jacek and Sach in 2012, and they put forward this definition. So it's the ability to persist and utilise mental skills to overcome perceived physical, psychological, emotional and environmental obstacles in the relentless pursuit of a goal.
Kendall, can you please describe some of the factors that contributed to athletes that did not finish in the literature?
I can. There's only been a few studies that have looked at reasons for withdrawal and contributing events that lead up to it that have been published. And quitting is not a part of the ultra-endurance athlete's mentality, so they actually are quite disturbed by this. So whilst it has been identified as acceptable to be timed out or withdrawing due to an injury, opting to quit the race was actually viewed with disdain. So most of the most common performance limiting issues that we found in the literature were nausea and vomiting was highly reported, blisters and muscle pain, so they're the highest ones that they've found. And they found that the decision to withdraw is built up upon as the event progresses. So the succession of experience that are linked to problems that develop in a runner's body. And they also found that the constant mental and physical battle between positive and negative associated thoughts contributed to them either being able to rapidly modify their mode of involvement with that, which meant they could work through it, or to be unable to and focus on the feelings of discomfort. So they found some variability in the temperament of athletes that were able to distance themselves from the discomfort and those that engaged in it, which led to either success in completing or a DNF, which is something that they don't want.
What are some of the gaps you identified in the research?
So following our literature search, we found some key components that were in line with our goals for Wairua Spirit, which was looking at mental toughness and pain tolerance and what endurer actually means. So understanding the psychological underpinnings of mental toughness and endurance athletes is important. It's been under-researched.
Yeah.
And there's only been a few studies that have investigated why participants withdraw from an event, so that then informed our methods and our aims and objectives for this project.
Can you please tell us a little bit more about the HURT 100?
The HURT 100, which stands for the Hawaiian Ultra Running Trail event, is referred to as a very difficult event designed for the adventurous and well-prepared ultra athlete. There is a lottery system where athletes put their name in, and they're either lucky enough to be drawn out and participate. There's 140 participants invited each year, and it has a very high DNF or failure rate, so around 50 to 60% depending on the conditions. And it's 161.2 kilometres with 7,467 elevation gain throughout. It is 5 loops that are partial out and back. They have a total of 20 river crossings. And it's in a semi-tropical rainforest, so it can be quite humid.
Yeah.
If it rains, it's really slippery. There's lots of roots and rocks which interfere with the runner's ability to be able to form a consistent gait, and it's very challenging. So it's in the city. It's above the city in Honolulu in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds tough.
It is very tough.
Yeah.
We're just going to move into our methodology now and talk about our methods that we chose to answer our research questions. So a mixed method sequential design was chosen, and a combination of 2 data collection methods were used, both qualitative and quantitative. And Anthony, for his research project for his honours, has taken on the quantitative component, and he's going to talk about that in a minute. And the qualitative component was involved semi-structured interviews with our participants. So Anthony, can you describe a little bit about the surveys that we used and chose, and talk a little bit about their background and how they contributed to addressing our research questions?
Sure.
Excellent.
So the survey tools that we used were a form of psychometric testing, and we were looking at these athletes, their level of mental toughness and their level of self-efficacy, because these 2 traits or concepts or constructs have been found in the literature to relate to each other. We used the sports mental toughness questionnaire to measure mental toughness in these athletes, and we used the endurance sports self-efficacy scale to measure self-efficacy in the ultra-endurance athletes.
Excellent. That's perfect. And can you just go about how we undertook this next step? So how the participants how were they invited to, and then talk a little bit about your findings and what steps you used to analyse the data?
Sure.
Okay.
So we sent these surveys out through email to the athletes around 1 week before the event, and we wanted to find out a few things about these athletes. So we collected demographic data and also information about their training and their experience and those kind of things. So then we could analyse those aspects of their lives against their levels of mental toughness and self-efficacy. But what we actually found was that mental toughness and self-efficacy in our study didn't or wasn't able to predict performance in these athletes. But what we found was that it was actually no difference between males and females in terms of their levels of mental toughness and their self-efficacy. In the literature, self-efficacy and mental toughness were found to be related in some aspect. We wanted to investigate that further, And what we'd actually found was they were highly related to each other. This is a good finding because it's able to help us explain the underlying factors of mental toughness. Because self-efficacy is actually it's like a belief in yourself. So you're able to believe that you're competent enough to finish the race, or you believe in yourself enough that you can pace yourself correctly. And an interesting finding with self-efficacy in other research is that there's actually an increase in endogenous opioids, which is the happiness sort of feeling, the euphoria, and also the pain buffering effects, more commonly known as endorphins. So if you have higher levels of self-efficacy, it would make sense that your mental toughness would be higher as well, because you're actually naturally buffering pain with the self-efficacy. So in terms of explaining mental toughness, self-efficacy, and it is kind of agreed upon in the literature that like having a self-confidence is a massive aspect to mental toughness. And one of the subscales, which was also highly related as a part of the sports mental toughness questionnaire, was your levels of confidence. So it was highly related, which is a very good finding. And it's going to help us to explore more findings in future research. Another interesting finding was that we compared our sample of ultramarathon runners to other samples of different sports in the literature using the same questionnaire. And it was found that the sample of ultramarathon runners was significantly greater in their levels of mental toughness than other athletes. Now, what this tells us is that due to the fact that we could not predict performance in our sample, whether someone had higher levels of mental toughness and self-efficacy, then other athletes would get better times or better scores in the HERT 100, as most of the athletes actually, on average, had very high levels of both mental toughness and self-efficacy. So if our athletes are greater than other athletes in other sports with these psychological concepts, it suggests that there may be a ceiling effect. So there may be a certain amount of mental toughness and self-efficacy that is required to actually be able to even want to think about competing in an event of this level, this elite ultra endurance event.
That's a really interesting finding. Thank you.
So now that we've spoken about the quantitative aspects of this research study, Kendall was actually able to collect qualitative data as well. So Kendall, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the aspects of the qualitative data, starting with the athlete's motivation for why would they participate in an ultramarathon event?
Ultramarathon. So the first bit was there was so much interest from these participants to participate in research, and it was really fabulous. I interviewed 13 athletes that completed or competed in the event. Out of those, there was 5 that didn't finish, and the interviews were undertaken 7 face-to-face and 5 over the phone, and they lasted between 30 and 50 minutes on average. And within the first 5 days, so it was really capturing that raw reflection and emotion and experience of their event. Some of the motivating factors that led them to participate in ultramarathons in general, not just this event, were influential friends. So someone had said, come on a trail run with me. You'll be wary of them. They had a really high need, so one of the biggest things was to explore their physical and mental limits and chasing that continual growth. The higher the chance of failure was deemed better. It was also for the benefit of their physical and mental health. So physically they may have had a previous health issue like being overweight, had heart problems, been a previous smoker, and the exercise generated their engagement into this sport. Also the need for competition, so they may have excelled in previous events, and a natural progression from high school sports to longer runs, so 10, 21k, 42, and then it's kind of like what's next. And there's also the suggestion of a backdoor entry into it from hikers that they do actually quite well in these events. They carry heavy backpacks through the trails, and it kind of prepares them well. So there was a few hikers that had entered into these events from that, and just being in nature. So the human being needs to it benefits from being in nature, and a lot of people just do that for their own space, their ability to reflect in nature and engage in the sport that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're not just crazy.
There's a lot of crazies out there.
Okay. So you're able to share what you found in reference to some of the highlights and the low points of these athletes that competed in the hurt?
Yeah, so for these athletes that we really wanted to identify some of the key moments in time that they either really struggled or they felt elation. So for some of the competitors, just actually getting to the start line and being amongst the runners and having worked through all that pre-race anxiety to actually be there and feel that excitement, that was one of the moments that they reflected on. I went, oh, that was amazing. Yeah. The overwhelming response from all of the participants was the community. So the highlights were the aid stations, the people that were crewing for them, that were pacing them, everyone that was involved. Wow. This has a really strong feel for community. This race has been going for a long time. It's really hard to get into, and there's a real reason for that. So community was really strongly voiced. They had points in time where they were running and they felt physically strong, and they reflected on that as being really encouraging, and it kind of stuck with them post-race where they remembered they felt strong. Yeah. And some of them loved the challenge of the actual trail. So strangely enough, even though it's notoriously in mountainous regions where it's physically demanding, that's what they seek. So that was a high point for some.
Okay.
Yeah, and so some of the low points on the flip side were their feeling that they were underprepared. So coming into it, and they're actual linked up with another one of the reality versus the actual perception. So how they felt they were moving. Yeah. They felt really flat at a point in time where they didn't expect to. So early fatigue, early physical issues were really a low point where the perceptions didn't meet expectations, or reality and expectations were not aligned. So that was a real challenge. Knowing that they weren't going to make cut-off. So that was a really confronting experience for them, because everyone enters wanting to complete. Yeah. And even though they know there's a chance that they might not, when the reality of that timing if they couldn't get on the last loop, or they were not going to make the time, that was really hard. And the final one was working through the physical issues. So all of the participants that were interviewed had some sort of physical issue to manage, and the biggest one was gastric distress, pain and blisters. Yeah. Yeah.
So how did these ultramarathon runners overcome these low points?
So in regard to managing their physical issues, some of them, it was basic, addressing the issue as it arose. So if they found that they were having some foot issues, they'd stop and identify the problem and treat it. Others use supplementation, so for extreme fatigue, or they felt like they were cramping, they'd use specific medications that they'd chosen, or pain relief. Mental techniques that they used was a lot of positive self-talk. So for some of the mantras that they use is pain is temporary, and using the pain as fuel to continue to move forward, and saying that things will get better. Yeah. So that they were able to turn things around or manage that with some of the techniques that they brought up. They had the confidence in their ability to reassess when things weren't going to plan, or they were behind the time that they were hoping to get, or they were feeling unexpectedly fatigued based on their preconceived idea of how they would perform. And the last one was really going back and digging deep into remembering why they signed up for this event and why they do run, and their why, reflecting on their why.
Okay. So that got them through their low points. Is that similar to how they overcome pain as well?
Yeah, so they reflected on, one of the questions was looking at how they worked through, or to describe their pain and discomfort and how they experienced it in this event. And they drew from past experiences, so people that had previously been exposed to trauma or unwanted outcomes in their life, their other life, emotional distress or relationship breakup. They drew from that comfort knowing that they have gotten through it before. They accept that suffering is going to happen, so there's no way you can get through these events without experiencing some pain and discomfort, so it was acceptable. The other one was reflecting on, again, their early exposure through childhood and or through previous training and growing up, and for that, knowing that they have prepared for this, they've worked through different scenarios before in their past, and they felt confident in that. Managing the actual experiences of pain discomfort, again, came down to individual preference. Some of the athletes preferred not to take any medications, such as Brufen, pain, Tylenol, and Panadol. They didn't feel it helped. Others relied heavily on that, and in additional to stimulants such as caffeine, and they mentioned like Red Bull and things like that to get them through those times when they were either feeling really flat or in a lot of pain. They felt when they felt an overwhelming urge to sit and stop and sleep, that they drew on a variety of strategies. So some of them actually did have a nap on the side, and they worked out ways to manage their nausea and vomiting. So that was another big issue, was the gastric distress. So the competition between our major muscle groups and our gut is often one of the biggest reasons why they have it, is that gut ischemia, and how they manage that was quite individual for each person, but they all had some form of gastric distress throughout and worked out how to manage it. So they were the main components, other than the additional changing of their gait, and how they, if they did have, say, some hip or knee pain, that they managed to adapt either their speed, the way that they will work through things, and just keeping calm and staying mindful was another practice that was mentioned.
So what experiences, past or present, did these athletes find that was most useful for their result at the Hurt 100?
So they were asked to identify what were contributed to the outcome, so whether or not they finished or they didn't. They had some really important answers, and one of the biggest ones that they all mentioned was external motivation.
Oh, really?
So I thought it might have been internal, but external was came out strongly in the themes. And not wanting to let their family or friends down was huge. So actually sharing it with people, knowing that they had that external pressure, but also support was a big motivator. Looking at their crew and paces and how they contributed to supporting them and feeling well motivated by them. And there was also a few that identified themselves to be an inspiration to others. So being able to undertake tasks that are deemed quite challenging and physically demanding beyond the normal realm of performance, to be able to inspire others to move forward with difficult or challenging components in their life. And again, previous experiences came up strongly. So a previous DNF, so a couple of the athletes had drawn on their previous did not finish or withdrawals from events, to really learn from that and to come into it with a drive that was going to work through that and prove that wasn't going to be a limiting factor in their performance, and draw from that. And in combination with that, it was that they'd had successful completion of tough races. So that was, they came in with knowing that they've been through similar events and been able to work through or manage or train and perform well. And two others that were tied in together was previous difficult life experiences as well as living a fortunate life.
Okay.
So those were identified as important for a couple of them.
Yeah.
And the strongest one that they felt contributed was either under-preparing or preparing well through their training. So it was what is done in the dark is shone in the light, or something like that. That was significant for, especially for the did not finishers.
Okay.
If it wasn't related to an injury, it was they felt they underprepared themselves for the actual terrain and challenges of this particular race. Yeah.
Kendall, can you please talk to us about the events that led up to these athletes withdrawing from the event?
Yeah, so there was 5 that didn't finish out of the 13 that were interviewed.
Okay.
And some of the common traits were that there was a layering of distress. And that's evident in the literature as well, is that there's a build-up of ongoing issues that either are unable to be addressed due to fitness level or continuing worsening of their physical or psychological state that they're unable to manage, and just that they're unable to get to the other side. So things didn't get better, and they just went, I actually am at my threshold of being able to manage myself physically or psychologically. Another one was that ran out of time, so feeling either they underestimated the training that was needed to perform well, and or they didn't have a good race day. So there was a couple athletes that reflected on whether or not they were physically well enough. So one had a query virus afterwards, but another also had an ongoing injury, so they went on to participate but felt that contributed to their withdrawing. And the other one was abnormal pain or distress above and beyond what they expected to be the pain. So they felt if they continued on, it would be detrimental to their long-term health. So they either had a fall or an injury that was not in line with their previous experience of pain and discomfort.
Okay, so like unexpected
and worsening, and feeling a little bit overwhelmed and not able to manage it or to make it better.
Did the crewing team, was it able to help at all on this?
Yeah, we asked specifically for some feedback on how the crewing team contributed to outcomes, and whether or not there was anything that they would change or improve on how they were managed or supported during their race, because there's not a lot of research out there. And they found an overwhelming positive response from all of these athletes in that they were able to preempt their needs. So coming in, they were able to read their mood, and often they're quite familiar with them, their friends or family or loved ones that are on the crewing team, and it's such an important role that they play, because they kind of manage themselves and to get to that point, and knowing that someone's going to be there that understands what they need. So they would one of the runners that came in was feeling really flat and deflated based on their perceived performance and how they were feeling at that time. And when they came in, the crew read that really quickly and responded in a really enthusiastic way. And by the time they saw them at the next aid station, they'd all rallied together, and he felt that it helped him get through to the next loop and continue on. And just their encouragement and positivity was the final one. So familiarity, preempting their needs, and encouragement and positivity. And there was a couple that didn't have crews from other that were other participants, and they felt that they were really missing out on that support, even though the aid station and the people were there having someone know what they needed was deemed quite vital in their outcome.
Makes me feel like I want to get a part of the community.
I think you should. Beware of those influential friends, Anthony.
I will. Can you tell us what the athletes were able to take away from this after they were able to reflect on their experiences?
Yeah, there were some really deep and meaningful experiences, and some of them felt like that they had a lot of pride in their achievement. Whether or not they finished or didn't, they still felt proud that they got to the start, they were able to have a really good go, and for whatever reason finished or didn't finish. So there was some a lot of humility and pride there. They reflected that humans are amazing, and so either went above and beyond what they thought they could achieve, and just watching, being motivated by others, so they could see other athletes on their trail, and looking at the time that some of these athletes are able to do this course was just mind-blowing. So that human beings have got this greater capacity, and they are pretty amazing. And some of the life lessons that they were able to take from the race and reflect back on how that was going to improve their own everyday life. So thinking about their ability to problem solve, their ability to generate and work through issues when they know, or not complain about daily tasks that they're enduring through the day because they're tired, where they know they've actually been at their lowest point, able to work through it. So that was felt that they could carry it on. But there was a couple of quotes that I pulled out that I felt were meaningful to this cohort of people that had just been through this experience. You can do a lot more than you think. Just keep going. There's always something left. This was one that kind of ties everything in together, and it says, I always say life is training for ultra, and ultra is training for life.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And another one, sports don't build character, they reveal it.
Yeah. Okay.
And finally, it's hurt. You've got to expect anything, right?
Yeah.
And so this kind of event is consistent in the toughest, one of the toughest ultra marathons, and the deeper meaningful emotions that came from just being involved in it was quite. It was entertaining, and it's you can understand why these athletes participate in these crazy events.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. He doesn't understand. He will, though, one day.
One day.
So just to bring all of this together, what we feel that the research study has contributed, it has highlighted some of the psychological and physiological contributors to the outcomes of events for these athletes. And it's highlighted some of the traits and tricks and tools that they use to either motivate themselves psychologically or to manage themselves physically. Anthony, is there anything specific that you feel would benefit from further investigation based on your component of the study?
I think further investigation would be very useful in discovering more of the psychological components that would go into predicting performance with these ultramarathon athletes, especially in reference to broadening or making it more context-specific aspects of mental toughness that is unique to ultramarathon runners. And I think if we do this, then sports psychologists will be able to hone in their psychological skills training to a greater level, so that we're able to use the psychological skill training to push ultra marathon runners into more elite levels of events, and also to be able to increase their performance and maintain their level of composure during the entire event.
Excellent. Yeah, that's exciting because it's in its infancy, research around ultramarathons, and it's really exciting to be involved in a component of this. So research is kind of correlates to an ultramarathon in that it's exciting to start, it's arduous and time-consuming in the middle, and then it's exciting to finish and feel like... So we're at the stages of just bringing it all together. We're working on some papers together along with Jeff Lovell, and then we'll be generating another idea for the next event, which is going to be undertaken in August in Canada, and it's called the Fat Dog 120. So it's 120 miles. It's ranked the 9th toughest ultramarathon in the world, and Jamie Milne will be training hard for that in the lead up to it. We'll be working together in collaboration with the sports science team to generate another research project. So we'll look forward to sharing that with you, and have some more fun.
Sounds good.
In the books.
Yep.
Thank you.